Monday on Channel 2 News, rockfall and road failure.
The road just left off.
More than 200 roads and bridges damaged by last year's 7.1 earthquake.
About $10 million worth of repairs.
Will that number rise? And how many roads still need work?
The things we were able to do will prepare us for another disaster.
Monday on Channel 2 News, reporter Kristen Durand dives into road repair progress for our special series, 1 year later. The quake, the aftermath, the recovery.
The earthquake from November 30th will be remembered forever.
The magnitude 7.1 quake shook the Anchorage area on 8:30 in the morning during the peak morning rush hour, presenting a daunting task for DOT.
Channel 2's Kristen Durand shows us how far construction of roads and bridges have come 1 year later.
The earthquake damage here on the Minnesota Drive ramp at West International Airport Road was seen around the world. And at a time where construction season is typically wrapped up, it was right back to work for hundreds of DOT workers and contractors working to make emergency repairs in some of the area's most critical pieces of infrastructure. November 30th, 2018 was a typical Friday morning at work for DOT project engineer Maher Abweed. That is until 8:30 a.m.
The monitor started just shaking and fell off.
Just an hour later, this is what he was faced with.
It was kind of shocking how much damage was happening. The road just left off.
Tasked with designing a plan to repair this cracked, crumbling, and impassable stretch of road, a critical corridor leading up to Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport.
Right when we got there, we went as quickly as possible, got accelerated schedule. We just started hauling in, hauling out material, stockpiling, getting things going so that we can efficiently place everything and not have any lag time.
It was time to get to work, and quick.
Within 2 hours, we had an excavator taking out part of the pavement and starting work.
It was a scene that made its way around the world when it happened, and again when emergency repairs were made less than 5 days later. A difficult assignment, especially during winter when snow and freezing temperatures make it harder to compact asphalt before it cools. Construction season was over, but at this point it was all hands on deck.
They had a late season, so some of their equipment wasn't 100% winterized, so we got lucky there. Just having the contracting community be able to talk to each other and get equipment out there. I mean, at one point I was gonna call a sand truck to come sand the road to make sure there wasn't ice and for the equipment, and the contractor had already called a friend that worked for the sanding company. So I mean, it was just everyone's working together.
This interchange was just one of about 8 major corridors repaired with emergency fixes a few days following the quake. Portions of road along the Seward Highway, the Glen Highway, and out in the Mat-Su, including Glen Highway north to Palmer or the Palmer flyover, the Parks Highway, and the place of another photo that went viral, Vine Road, all needed immediate emergency repairs.
We felt pretty good about that. We had actually done some lessons learned after we had a bridge strike out on the Glen Highway, and we had actually done a bit of training, and we had fortified our conference room as an emergency operations center. And so when the earthquake happened, because a lot of us had just done training and we had done some lessons learned off of those smaller incidents, we were able to put those into action.
More than 200 spots along roads and bridges were left in a state of disrepair following the shake. With the help of the Federal Highway Administration, the DOT was able to secure more than $60 million for earthquake damage. DOT spokesperson Shannon McCarthy says about $10 million worth and about 90% of repairs have been completed up to this point. The DOT is still evaluating which spots will need further repairs over the next few years.
There are spots that are going to have to get a permanent repair, and that's because you don't get as good of a product typically if you're constructing in November versus June.
Some built up even better than they were before the quake.
We expect to get 20 years out of any project we do. And of course, if we had a project that was, or a spot of road that was older, from the 1970s, then I expect that the repair will actually shore that piece of infrastructure up and it'll be stronger.
Strong, just like the community that answered the call.
There was one subcontractor that was out there within an hour of when I called him to ask for some of the seating, the stabilization. We were talking about striping. They were out there within a couple hours. I mean, everybody was ready to help out, and that was a huge benefit to our success.
After evaluations are complete and all the remaining permanent repairs get the go-ahead, the DOT hopes to have everything complete by summer 2021.
Today we take you back to some of those homes and the people we profiled after the quake to see how much has been repaired. It was a year ago this week. The ground shook with a magnitude 7.1 earthquake.
It was incredible how much damage there was.
Well, we're halfway through.
And many are still struggling to fix the damage.
And every piece of drywall was cracked all the way through from corner to corner and everywhere.
Morgan Fredrickson lives in Eagle River, and despite a year of repairs, he actually considers himself lucky because he had insurance.
That's actually a smaller crack.
The 7.1 quake resulted in a near total rebuild of his home.
Yeah, basically down to the guts.
The cost? About $280,000, as much as the house is worth.
Try to focus on the things we can control, right?
Just down the road, parts of David Baldwin's house had to be lifted and re-leveled. In some parts, the front porch shook free and fell off. And he still needs to fix the sheetrock, which will cost more than $100,000.
It was pretty bad to sit here and take a look at all this damage and this broken concrete behind us and cinder blocks and realize just how much damage there was to the home.
Eagle River suffered some of the worst damage in South Central. Homes like this one became the public face of the destruction.
It's pretty upsetting just because, you know, that was going to be our home. It was going to be our forever home. We had a lot of plans to live there.
There isn't enough money or insurance to cover the cost of repairs or even enough to tear the home down. The homeowners are now in negotiations with their bank to give the property back and walk away.
There was a couple nights there where, you know, end up crying yourself to sleep, but we had time to let it sink in, and basically, you know, we're okay with it. We're like, all right, let's just let it go, start anew.
November 30th is the feast day of St. Andrew, so we call this St. Andrew Day earthquake.
That was also the day chandeliers fell at St. Andrew Catholic Church in Eagle River. The statue of a treasured patron saint broken into 8 pieces.
That's just indicative of what you find on practically every wall in the church.
But Father Arthur Rora would rather focus on the church's blessings.
Praise God that we haven't had any interruption of being able to offer Mass at all.
Showing a magnitude of strength that can't easily be shaken.
Oh, wow. So, Rebecca, when you visited these places in Eagle River, what sticks in your mind the most?
What really sticks in my mind is how much time has gone by, but yet people are still rebuilding. The amount of work that has gone into the rebuilding and the amount of work that still has to go into rebuilding, and just the sheer amount of money that people have spent on all this. One of the families in this piece, they're staying at a hotel. So this is months and months of this. This is just amazing amounts of costs that are associated with this. And tomorrow we revisit Sand Lake in Anchorage. It's in this area where homes sunk and cracked, and for many it's cost a fortune to fix.
12 months ago, the Sand Lake community was rocked. Damage to homes.
This used to be straight.
And roads. Some of the worst to be found.
It sunk outwards, but also down the middle.
Even though a year has passed, for many, the real recovery effort is just getting started.
As much as, 6 inches drop over 10 feet toward the back of the house.
A 20-year resident of the Sand Lake area, John Spillman has spent months just trying to get things back to normal.
My house just got re-leveled within the last month. Everybody's busy during the summertime, and there's still people on this cul-de-sac are still, working on their foundations and other damage.
Identifying the extent of the damage, applying for state and federal assistance, getting onto wait lists for repairs. It's all part of a process that has dragged on for many residents.
I still have constituents who are doing earthquake repairs, who are going through the FEMA process, and they've been faced with a pretty wild task, which is to move on in spite of a lot of damage and a lot of financial loss.
In some neighborhoods, houses up and down the street left in disrepair, and residents left looking for answers.
When we saw what was going on, it was just, this is crazy. They think that when you have an earthquake in Alaska that it doesn't affect your foundation, and that if it affects your foundation, it's only $2,500 or $3,500.
One street in particular continuing to take hits long after the shaking stopped. The people living there refusing to go on record. They say multiple burglaries have occurred there since last November. APD confirmed one known incident, but a note hanging on one door claims they were hit 3 times and that nothing remains inside. All this while families were working to get additional help from state and federal agencies.
Sand Lake and Eagle River were both very hard hit, and we worked very closely with the community councils in those neighborhoods. We are familiar with the damages and the situations that people are in those communities.
Even with disaster assistance, some residents face the burden of paying off thousands of dollars for repair costs, and it could be years, even decades, before Sand Lake truly moves past the November 30th earthquake.
It's a lot of balls to try and juggle at one time, and there's other people that have said, you know what, not doing it, walking away.
But in the face of those challenges, Sand Lake and other communities have banded together, finding strength and support in their fellow Alaskans, taking the first steps on a long road to recovery.
I love this neighborhood.
Hank Davis.
We're not walking away.
Channel 2 News.
And after the jolt that we all experienced, we heard from many people that they felt unprepared and were finally motivated to come up with an emergency plan.
So we wanted to check in 1 year later.
Mainly, we're just trying to be ready for the specific day. So we got some stored up water, canned goods. We got a go bag in case with some essentials that are packed into it in case something bad happens and we need to get out of the house right away.
Yes, I got an emergency kit for my car, and I also reinforced bookshelves and put guards in front of them, and hope a lot that we never have one like that again.
I had a whole list that I had cut out of a magazine that told me everything that I needed, and I had all this conversation on social media about it and all these ideas with every intention to do so, and none of the follow through, unfortunately.
We have bags under, that if our building doesn't fall down that we can get to, like bug out bags where we just grab and go just in case.
Hundreds of students and staff are still waiting to get back into their home schools after the November 30th earthquake.
Channel 2's Beth Verge visited some of the hardest hit places to see what's next for them.
Inside a boarded up Houston middle school, aside from school bells that still ring on schedule, hauntingly quiet. Ceilings opened.
There's a loss of confidence when you walk through here and you see the roof separated from the walls.
Dust settled and clocks frozen.
There was an aftershock, but that's when the clock stopped at that just before 10 something, 11.
Behind the scaffolding that's helping hold this school up, a year after a magnitude 7.1 earthquake shook South Central Alaska.
Like this, that's bad.
Houston Middle School is part of the Matanuska-Susitno Borough School District and merged with Houston High School for the foreseeable future.
The state designates students that are in portables as unhoused because it's not the ideal situation for safety of a school campus or for academic performance.
Yeah, obviously getting kids back in school is our #1 priority, probably a year, potentially longer. If it's a full rebuild, you're at least that, potentially longer. And that's after designs are complete and everything's signed off and money's there. So, I mean, you're looking at more than a year for sure.
The borough is also stuck working out whether it ought to replace Houston Middle altogether.
All these are broken away because all that support went away. So they're separating from each other.
Few were inside when the quake hit.
And then it just started shaking rapidly and I just dove under the table.
Most of them weren't even in the schools yet, which was very fortunate. But if it would have happened an hour or two later, yeah, it could have been real bad.
Today, the halls remain full of debris.
So when the structural wall, this one moved, it tore these all off.
A similar situation for a couple of Anchorage schools, including Greening Middle and Eagle River Elementary.
There is some structural damage inside of the building.
Last year, we found Greening teachers packing up to move out. Today, the school's halls are cleaned up, but classrooms are empty. And while evidence of damage is visible throughout much of the building,
I mean, it's just
completely open.
Two areas are of particular concern. A stairwell that's detaching from the building.
Concerns that this whole stairwell is moving away from the building.
And an interior wall that didn't appear to be a problem when we saw it last year, but has since been found separated from the school's roof, held up for now by metal posts.
To ensure that this wall didn't collapse and that the roof didn't collapse.
And those two deficiencies are really life-threatening in the event that we had another seismic event. There could be complete failure inside the building.
So a year later, greening remains red tagged and unusable.
Hard to get back to that point where
its students and teachers,
they can just relax and be kids again.
Stuck since then in temporary classrooms at Chugiak High School.
But we're making it work, but again, it's not ideal for our kids.
Eagle River Elementary also closed.
So if you look from the outside, you're going to see where the wall is bowing out.
Yeah.
And where it's just starting to crumble.
And housed at Homestead for the time being.
Naturally, you know, the kids and their parents would like them to be back to their own schools. I mean that's human nature, but you know, we're working towards that goal, and hopefully within 2 years, you know, those schools will be up and running again.
Dozens of schools damaged, but most, such as Diamond High, reopened. The exact timelines for those still closed, no one knows.
Man. And as for the status of the new projects, the district says July 2021 is the target for completion with an estimated price of $290 million.
A year after the big quake, Alaskans are still dealing with the emotional impacts of that day. Mike Ross has tonight's special report on the November 30th earthquake and how Alaskans are healing 1 year later.
Oh my gosh, you guys, we're having a huge, gigantic earthquake in Alaska right now.
Some people froze. Some people ran as the walls around them shook.
Scary, my adrenaline was pumping.
I was terrified because I thought that the house was going to collapse on me. So I just started sprinting.
The November 30th earthquake did much more than break apart roads and crack house foundations. It fractured our sense of security.
It was definitely scary, not knowing what to do.
Tony Skilja and his wife Jennifer.
The only thought in my head was to get to Sophia and Tony and just get downstairs if you can.
Are the young couple in this home security video grabbing their daughter Sophia and escaping their home barefoot in the snow.
Right when I got out the door and I was with Tony and Sophia, I was just crying.
We were sitting here doing the arts and crafts show for Providence Mental Health Clinic.
That's where Judy Levine was when it hit, hanging on inside Providence Hospital.
We were just kind of standing here because at that time we were watching the glass panel shake. We were watching the windows up above shake. We could see the walls shake. And
everything in the hospital atrium was rattling.
It got to a point where I was just praying because it got scary because this whole platform was just going sideways.
After the quake, Judy reached out on Facebook to others having trouble dealing with the fear.
I kept seeing a lot of women that just seemed to be distraught and very shook up.
And she organized a meetup with them at an East Anchorage coffee shop because of the view of the mountains.
We met, we talked. One of them was real shook up. She lived here her whole life. We got to talking about, hey, listen, where's your hope? Where's your faith?
But dealing with the fear was tough. A state health department survey done a month after the quake showed 78% had anxiety, fear, trouble sleeping, or panic attacks after the quake. 59% said their children experienced increased anxiety or distress.
But what about now? It's been a year. How are you feeling? Have the memories of that day faded? Or are you still feeling the emotional aftershocks?
So here at Bridges, we had an increase in calls right after the earthquake happened.
But counselors here say there's been a lot of healing during the past year.
People are pretty much okay. Yeah, most of us have gone on with our lives. Thankfully, there wasn't a lot of aftermath. That may have been different if we'd experienced more of a collapse of our infrastructure.
So this whole middle piece used to be out of glass, and all these shelves were out of glass too. So when the earthquake happened, they kind of slid forward, and all the decorations that were on top, including the glass shelving, fell right here to the ground.
For the Skiljas, there's still some very shaky nerves.
So I've been pretty anxious about just another earthquake hitting. I've definitely been waking up in the middle of the night sometimes, just if I hear anything.
The quake brought them even closer together as a couple, and having a more detailed family plan helps.
But at the same time, it just can happen anytime, and it could be worse. I guess that's the biggest fear, is that if it's worse, then what?
A question that comes with living in Alaska.
We love this place. We love Alaska. We stay here for a reason, but we know that we have to put up with the ground shaking.
And our nerves being rattled as well. I'm Mike Ross, Channel 2 News.
The state health department has not done any follow-up surveys since the quake a year ago, and the counselor Mike spoke with said the most important things you can do are talk to someone if you're still having fear about the quake, and then come up with a family plan to be ready for the next big one.
Most Alaskans are familiar with the concept of fault lines, but they don't always know how they work. And with more than 11,000 aftershocks since last November, the crack that created the November 30th earthquake isn't quite done yet. What are we looking at?
This is basically the Castle Mountain fault zone.
With an earthquake recorded on average every 15 minutes.
And it's probably got about 70 miles of offset on it.
And 143 active faults.
It means that if that side of the fault was sitting still, then this side of the fault moved that way 70 miles.
Oh, wow. All Alaskans live with some level of earthquake hazard.
On a larger scale, if we look at the rock unit that's on that side, it's very different than the rocks that are over here. So that's one clue.
Near the base of Hatcher Pass, one of those faults is visible from the road. The Castle Mountain Fault runs from near Sutton along the Talkeetna Range to the Houston area. And while it has the potential to produce a magnitude 7 earthquake, it wasn't the source of last year's 7.1 quake. In southern Alaska, there are 3 main sources of earthquakes. 2 of them are related to the subduction zone of the Pacific Plate.
The Pacific Plate is sliding down underneath our feet. And right here, sort of like a giant conveyor belt going down into the Earth's mantle.
Big earthquakes like the 1964 quake occur in the shallow space where the 2 plates come together.
So it's this giant thrust kind of fault movement, one plate, one chunk of rock sliding against the other.
When the Earth's crust breaks deeper in the subduction zone, an earthquake can still occur.
So actually last year's Anchorage earthquake was one of those kind of earthquakes related to bending of this subducting plate far beneath our feet, 30 miles or so beneath our feet. And then when that broke, then that's what we felt at the surface.
The Castle Mountain Fault is a crustal fault right at the Earth's surface and often visible. The most famous of these faults is probably the San Andreas. Studying these faults and knowing how often earthquakes have occurred in the past can help plan for future quakes.
We're probably not going to have a 64-like earthquake in the near future. Our evidence for the recurrence of those kinds of earthquakes suggests that they may happen every, say, 300 to 600 years. We could have another Anchorage earthquake, one of these deep ones that doesn't come to the surface, probably at almost any time.
You've probably heard the theory that a bunch of smaller earthquakes will relieve the strain on faults so we don't have a big quake. Peter says it doesn't work that way. He did the calculations once, and we'd have to have a magnitude 5 earthquake every 5 minutes to release all the pressure from the 1964 earthquake. It's a good theory, but we don't have enough earthquakes for it to work.
So for this, because I mainly deal with the
So that's Jason DeLong from Rock Solid. I was talking with him this morning about less expensive ideas to upgrade a home. This house was built in 1957, so it doesn't have all those up-to-date engineering newer homes would have. So the concept was, what can we do to prepare the home for an earthquake? One idea was to start small, be sure that the toilet has an $8 hose which attaches to the wall. That's stronger and will ensure there won't be water damage to the house if it bounces around.
Chief Jody Hetrick joins us with an inside look at the Anchorage first responders and as they sprung into action. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, Maria.
So from the fire department standpoint, first concern, the shaking stops. What's the first thing responders are doing?
Very first thing is making sure that our resources are still available to respond. So we check with all the facilities and make sure that they were still standing. And then we check with all of our responders and make sure nobody got hurt. And then the very next step is get out and start what we call windshield surveys.
What was the city facing and the immediate needs and concerns?
Once we had a sense of what damage was out there, we knew that we had at least 5 tasks we needed to focus on. We had to get the roads open, we had to get the utilities functioning, we had to make sure that no one was going to be left out in the cold, we had to get a handle on all of the infrastructure damage that we were seeing in active facilities. We own an airport, the state owns an airport, and last, we had to make sure that we could get all the scarce resources that we need. Folks don't remember it now, but there was a moment where we weren't sure how we were going to be able to get diesel fuel to the northern portions of our municipality.
That's when we feel really isolated. We realize how isolated we are up here.
The earthquake on November 30th, 2018 tested the strength of buildings across Anchorage. The Federal Emergency Management Agency says they've provided over $26 million of individual disaster relief since the earthquake. That's money going to over 4,000 different Anchorage homes. Here in the Anchorage Bowl, about 4 in every 100 homes applied for individual disaster relief. But just north of the city, the numbers are very different. 1 in 5 homes, like this one here in Eagle River, applied for federal dollars. So why did this area see so much more damage?
There's some blocks on the stairs on the right here. Oops. So we're obviously focused on getting this all fixed here first. This is where most of the damage occurred, is in the basement.
Fresh sheetrock fails to hide jagged cracks along the door frames and walls of Duncan Whitley's Eagle River home.
It's what you don't know and what you don't see that you find out in the earthquake. Slowly but surely getting it back into shape.
The ground motion caused Whitley's house to lean downhill. Alarmed, he called an engineer.
The contractor originally, when they built the house, they didn't properly nail the sheathing on the outside of the house. Here.
Jake Horowsdowski is a structural engineer with PDC Engineers. He says Whitney's home and others in the area failed largely because the original builders missed critical steps. Mistakes, he says, would have been caught in a municipal inspection. That's why he wants to include Eagle River and Chugiak in Anchorage's building code enforcement area.
Well, Eagle River is a prime example of we have the code, it is in effect, however, there's no enforcement. So Anchorage, structurally they didn't really see much damage. But Chugiak River, we saw a lot more damage out here. And I think a lot of it really could have been prevented.
Municipal inspectors have assessed close to 4,000 homes. They red tag buildings that are unsafe to occupy. In the Anchorage Bowl, 17 red tagged homes. In Eagle River and Chugiak, 55.
As a structural engineer, I look around and I'd say, this is a ticking time bomb.
Not all contractors are on board with Horowsdowski's proposal.
We're building in 3 separate subdivisions out there.
Andre Spinelli with Spinell Homes says many contractors already hire private inspectors to ensure they're building to code. Bringing Anchorage's outlying communities into the municipality's enforcement area would just increase the cost of homes.
Although there is some value, I think that it might be too high of a price for what you're buying for that extra permitting fee.
This particular wall here was really bad.
Whitney estimates he's lost at least $150,000 in earthquake damages, and there are others who foreclosed because they couldn't afford repairs.
We've had a problem, and it's time for a change. Because when we do get the big earthquake, there could be a lot of loss of life if we don't build our homes correctly.
Anchorage's southernmost communities, Girdwood and Turnagain Arm, experience very little damage, and they're also outside of Anchorage's building safety service area. Scientists still don't know why this happened, and they say it's research for another day. Derek Minnemeyer, Channel 2 News.